The great chambers of the Galactic Council stretched out like a vast metal ocean under the artificial suns of Nexus Prime Station, and hundreds of alien beings filled the curved rows of seats that spiraled up toward the dome ceiling where holographic displays showed star maps and treaty documents and trade agreements, while the air hummed with translation devices working in dozens of languages to carry meaning across species barriers that had taken centuries to bridge. Ambassador Kethra of the Altarian Federation stood at the central podium, and his pale blue skin seemed to glow under the chamber lights, as his 4 eyes swept across the assembled delegates with the weight of terrible knowledge, and his voice carried the authority of a species that had survived longer than most civilizations could remember when he began to speak about the humans of Earth. The Altarians had spent 3 full cycles observing the third planet of the system, the humans called Sol, and what they had seen there filled them with both wonder and deep concern, because this young species showed signs of potential that could reshape the galaxy or destroy it, and Kethra had come to warn the Council about the mistake of underestimating these strange bipedal creatures who called themselves Human Supreme Commander Vex Thul of the Zephyrian Empire, shifted in his ceremonial armor, and the metal plates clinked softly as he listened to the Altarians' words with growing impatience, because the Zephyrians had conquered over 1,000 worlds in their march across the galaxy, and they had never met a species they could not break or bend to their will through superior technology and overwhelming force. Kethra spoke of incidents his people had witnessed on human worlds where mining crews had turned their industrial equipment into weapons when faced with raiders, and how entire colonies had unified within hours when natural disasters struck, and how their primitive nuclear technology had somehow managed to repel a scouting force from the Korthak raiders through tactics that defied all military logic. The human governments appeared chaotic and fragmented to outside observers, with dozens of different nations and political systems and corporate entities all seeming to work against each other in endless competition. But the Altarians had noticed something that other species missed, which was how quickly all that chaos could transform into focused unity when the humans perceived an external threat to their survival. Commander Vex Thul had heard enough of what he considered foolish warnings about creatures that had barely learned to travel between the planets of their own system, and he rose from his seat with his armor catching the light and casting long shadows across the nearby delegates as he prepared to address the Council with the confidence of someone who had never known defeat. The Zephyrian commander spoke in a voice that carried across the chamber without need for amplification, and he dismissed the Altarian concerns as the products of an overly cautious species that had grown soft from too many years of peace and prosperity, and he pointed out that human technology was centuries behind Zephyrian capabilities, and their military forces were scattered across multiple worlds, with no unified command structure. Vex Thul displayed holographic images of human ships and weapons that looked crude and primitive compared to Zephyrian technology, and he showed star charts marking the valuable mineral deposits and energy sources in the human sector that would greatly benefit the Zephyrian Empire, and he announced his intention to claim those resources for his people, regardless of any supposed human resistance. The other species in the council chamber listened with varying degrees of interest and concern, but most agreed with the Zephyrian assessment that humans posed no significant threat to an advanced galactic civilization, and several delegates even expressed support for the proposed expansion into human space, since it would open new trade routes and resource supplies for all council members. Ambassador Kethra tried once more to explain what his people had learned about human nature, and how these beings possessed a capacity for both creation and destruction that far exceeded what their technology might suggest, and he spoke of their willingness to sacrifice themselves for others, and their ability to find solutions that no other species would even consider. The Altarian described how human scientists had solved engineering problems by approaching them from completely unexpected angles, and how human soldiers had won battles against superior forces by using tactics that ignored conventional military wisdom, and how human civilians had survived disasters that would have destroyed other species through sheer determination and mutual cooperation. But Commander Vex Thul only laughed at these stories, and he asked the council to consider the facts rather than romantic tales about primitive aliens, and he pointed out that the Zephyrian Empire had defeated civilizations with technology far more advanced than anything the humans possessed, and that their victory would be swift and complete. The debate continued for several hours, with various delegates offering opinions and asking questions about trade implications and territorial boundaries. But the outcome was never really in doubt because the Zephyrian Empire was the most powerful military force in the galaxy, and no one wanted to oppose them over a species that most council members had never even heard of until today. As the session moved toward its conclusion, Commander Vex Thule formally announced his empire's intention to expand into the human sector within the next standard cycle, and he assured the council that the operation would be completed quickly and efficiently, with minimal disruption to galactic trade or politics. Ambassador Kethra made one final attempt to change the course of events, and he stood again at the podium with his four eyes focused directly on the Zephyrian commander, and his voice carried a weight of sorrow for what was about to unfold when he spoke. His last warning to the assembled delegates. The Altarian ambassador told the council that they were about to witness the consequences of mistaking apparent chaos for weakness and of assuming that technological superiority guaranteed victory, and he warned that the Zephyrian Empire was about to learn why his people had chosen to approach humanity with respect rather than conquest. Commander Vex Thule dismissed these final words with a gesture of contempt, and he promised the council that, within one cycle, they would see the Zephyrian flag flying over human worlds, and that the resources of Earth's sector would be flowing into galactic markets under proper Zephyrian management. The council session ended with the formal recording of Zephyrian intentions and the establishment of a timeline for the expansion into human space, and most delegates left the chamber discussing trade opportunities and resource allocations, while Ambassador Kethra remained at the podium staring at the star charts that showed the doomed path of the Zephyrian fleet toward Earth's system. In the empty chamber, with only the soft hum of life support systems and the distant glow of the artificial suns, the Altarian ambassador whispered a prayer for both species, because he knew that when the Zephyrian Empire met humanity, the galaxy would never be the same, and the consequences of this day's arrogance would echo across the stars for generations to come. General Patricia Kane stood in the command center of Luna Base, watching the streams of data flowing across dozens of monitors, while her staff worked frantically to process the intelligence that had arrived through intercepted alien communications. And the news was worse than anyone had expected, because an entire empire was planning to invade Earth's sector with overwhelming force. The intercepted messages painted a clear picture of Zephyrian intentions and their complete dismissal of human capabilities, and General Kane had spent 30 years in military service, but she had never faced anything like this, because the enemy possessed technology that was centuries ahead of human development, and they commanded resources that dwarfed anything humanity could muster. Within hours of receiving the threat assessment, something remarkable began to happen across human space, as word spread through official channels and unofficial networks and civilian communication systems, and the response defied every prediction that political scientists and military strategists had made about how humanity would react to an existential crisis. The governments of Earth set aside decades of political rivalry and economic competition to coordinate their response, and the corporations that normally fought each other for market share began sharing resources and technology, and the military forces that had been scattered across different commands suddenly found themselves operating under unified leadership for the first time in human history. Dr. Marcus Webb arrived at Luna Base within 6 hours of the initial alert, and his reputation as a brilliant but unpredictable physicist had earned him both admirers and critics throughout the scientific community. But General Kane knew that desperate times called for desperate measures and unconventional thinking. The physicist spread his preliminary calculations across the main display screen and explained his theory that humanity's greatest advantage was not their technology or their numbers, but their complete unpredictability compared to other galactic civilizations that had grown comfortable with established patterns of warfare and conquest. Webb proposed that instead of trying to match Zephyrian technology, they should weaponize human creativity and adaptability by turning every available resource into a potential weapon, and by coordinating responses that would be impossible for a centralized enemy command structure to predict or counter effectively. Captain Lisa Rodriguez received new orders while her cargo hauler was docked at Ceres Station, and within hours she was coordinating with dozens of civilian ship captains to begin the most ambitious retrofitting project in human history. As mining vessels and cargo haulers and passenger ships were transformed into improvised warships with weapons that no military manual had ever described. The civilian fleet that emerged from this effort looked chaotic and disorganized to any observer, familiar with traditional military formations. But Rodriguez and her fellow captains understood that their strength lay in their diversity and their ability to adapt to changing circumstances without waiting for orders from distant commanders. Engineer Jake Thompson was working in the asteroid mining stations when he received Dr. Webb's technical specifications, and he immediately understood the potential for adapting human fusion technology in ways that had never been attempted before because the aliens would expect conventional weapons and conventional tactics. Thompson began modifying mining charges and industrial fusion reactors to create weapons that could disrupt alien targeting systems and create area denial fields that would force enemy ships into disadvantageous positions, and his modifications were quickly shared across the human communication networks. The preparation efforts spread across every human settlement from the orbital platforms around Earth to the mining colonies in the outer system, and each group contributed their expertise and resources while maintaining enough independence to continue functioning, even if central coordination was disrupted during the coming battle. Admiral Helen Parker took command of the combined human fleet from her flagship, and she had never imagined commanding such a diverse collection of vessels. But she quickly realized that their apparent disorganization was actually a strategic advantage, because no enemy could predict how such a force would behave in combat. The human response included elements that no other galactic civilization would have considered, such as civilian volunteers who insisted on joining the defense effort, and scientists who continued working on new weapons even as enemy forces approached, and artists who created propaganda that boosted morale across human space. Communication networks that had been designed for commerce and entertainment were quickly adapted to carry military coordination. Traffic and manufacturing facilities that had been producing consumer goods were retooled to create ammunition and ship components, and research stations that had been studying peaceful applications of technology were redirected toward developing new weapons. The most remarkable aspect of the human preparation was how quickly individuals and groups took initiative without waiting for official authorization, and how seamlessly their independent efforts coordinated with the overall defense strategy, because humanity had developed a culture that valued both individual creativity and collective cooperation. Engineer Kate Morrison established a hidden base on Europa, where she coordinated the construction of automated defense platforms that could be deployed throughout the outer planets, and her team worked around the clock to create weapons that would activate only when human ships were threatened. The defense platforms used technology that humanity had acquired through peaceful contact with other alien species, but Morrison and her team found ways to weaponize these systems that their original creators had never imagined, because humans approached technology with a flexibility that more advanced civilizations had lost. As the Zephyrian fleet approached the edge of human space, the defenders were ready with strategies that defied every conventional military doctrine and weapons that had been created from industrial equipment and improvised from civilian technology, and tactics that emerged from the unique human ability to find opportunity in chaos. General Kane received final reports from across human space, and she realized that her species had accomplished something that no military academy had ever taught, and no strategic manual had ever described, because they had transformed their entire civilization into a weapon while maintaining the humanity that made their sacrifice worthwhile. The human preparation was complete, and the defenders waited in positions throughout the solar system, knowing that they faced an enemy with superior technology and overwhelming numbers, but confident that their unity and creativity and willingness to sacrifice would prove more powerful than any weapon the galaxy had ever seen. The Zephyrian invasion fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of Earth's solar system, like a swarm of deadly metal insects, and Commander Vex Thule stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the tactical displays show 300 advanced warships arranged in perfect formation, with each vessel capable of reducing a city to ash in minutes. The massive dreadnought Eternal Dominion served as the fleet's command center, and its weapons arrays, could destroy entire fleets, while its shields could withstand the combined firepower of most planetary defense systems, and Vex Thule had used this ship to break the resistance of dozens of civilizations across the galaxy. The Zephyrian commander expected to encounter perhaps a dozen primitive, human vessels clustered around their homeworld, and he had planned to demonstrate his empire's power by destroying them quickly and efficiently before moving on to claim the valuable resources that had drawn his attention to this remote sector. Instead, the sensor reports that reached his command station described something that defied all military logic and tactical understanding, because the screens showed over 2,000 human vessels scattered throughout the solar system in patterns that made no sense according to any known strategy. The Zephyrian computer system struggled to classify the human fleet, because it included everything from obvious military cruisers to converted cargo haulers and mining platforms and civilian transports that appeared to have been hastily armed with weapons of unknown design and capability. Admiral Helen Parker commanded the human forces from her refitted exploration vessel, and she opened a communication channel to the Zephyrian flagship with a message that carried both warning and promise, because humanity had learned that sometimes the only way to prevent greater violence was to demonstrate the cost of aggression. Parker told the alien commander that his fleet had one opportunity to withdraw from human space and return to his empire with news that Earth's sector was defended by people who would not yield to threats or surrender to superior numbers, and that any attempt at conquest would result in consequences that would echo across the galaxy. Commander Vex Thule responded with the contempt that had served him well in previous conquests, and he dismissed the human warning as the desperate bluffing of primitives who did not understand the reality of their situation, and he ordered his fleet to begin the systematic destruction of human resistance. The first Zephyrian attack came in the form of concentrated plasma fire from their main battle line, and the alien weapons reached across space with deadly precision to target what appeared to be the most significant human vessels in an attempt to destroy their command structure and break their morale. The human response shocked the Zephyrian tactical officers, because instead of attempting to match their formation or engage in conventional battle, the human ships scattered in directions that seemed random but were actually part of a carefully coordinated strategy that took advantage of their superior knowledge of local space. Captain Lisa Rodriguez led her civilian fleet through the asteroid belt, where her crews had spent years learning to navigate the dangerous rocks and debris. And her ships used the asteroids as cover, while launching attacks with modified mining equipment that created electromagnetic pulses and disrupted Zephyrian targeting systems. Engineer Jake Thompson's modifications to human fusion technology became apparent as mining platforms throughout the system began launching projectiles that moved at speeds the Zephyrians had not anticipated and created gravity distortions that interfered with alien navigation and communication systems. The aliens discovered that human weapons did not follow galactic conventions for warfare, and instead of trying to penetrate Zephyrian shields, directly the humans attacked with swarms of small drones that overwhelmed point defense systems and kinetic projectiles that struck with devastating force. Dr. Marcus Webb's innovations proved their worth as human ships deployed weapons that created localized space-time distortions and launched clouds of metallic particles that interfered with Zephyrian sensors and used modified communication equipment to jam alien coordination frequencies. The most disturbing aspect of human tactics from the Zephyrian perspective was their willingness to sacrifice individual ships to destroy multiple enemy vessels. And pilot Nancy Clark demonstrated this philosophy when she deliberately rammed her damaged fighter into a Zephyrian cruiser's engine. Corps Captain Tony Martinez followed her example by using his cargo hauler as a guided missile to destroy an enemy command ship, and his sacrifice took out not only his target, but 2 other vessels that were too close to avoid the explosion that followed. The Zephyrian fleet found itself fighting an enemy that ignored every rule of civilized warfare and refused to acknowledge the superiority of alien technology, and instead attacked with a ferocity and creativity that no military academy in the galaxy had ever prepared them to face. Commander Vex Thule watched his tactical displays with growing alarm as his supposedly overwhelming technological advantage failed to provide the easy victory he had expected, and his forces began taking losses that were completely disproportionate to what primitive humans should have been able to inflict. The human strategy became clear as the battle continued because they were not trying to win a single decisive engagement, but instead were fighting a war of attrition that played to their strengths and exploited weaknesses in Zephyrian doctrine that had never been tested against an enemy like humanity. Every human ship that was destroyed transmitted its tactical data to the rest of the fleet before its destruction, and this allowed the surviving vessels to adapt their strategies in real time and learn from each engagement in ways that the centralized Zephyrian command structure could not match. The aliens began to realize that they were not fighting a traditional military force but rather an entire civilization that had transformed itself into a weapon and was willing to accept any sacrifice necessary to protect their independence and their way of life. As the first phase of the battle drew to a close, Commander Vex Thule found himself commanding a fleet that had suffered more casualties in a few hours than it had experienced in years of previous conquests, and he was forced to acknowledge that his empire had gravely underestimated the humans of Earth. The second phase of the battle began as the Zephyrian fleet attempted to regroup and adapt to human tactics, but they discovered that their enemy had anticipated this response and prepared countermeasures that turned the aliens' technological advantages into liabilities that could be exploited by human creativity and determination. Commander Ray Phillips led a squadron of converted research vessels into the heart of the enemy formation and demonstrated humanity's greatest tactical advantage by improvising new attack patterns in real time based on observations of Zephyrian weaknesses that became apparent only during the heat of combat. The aliens had expected to face an enemy that would fight according to established galactic conventions for warfare, but instead they encountered a species that treated every engagement as an opportunity to learn and adapt and develop new methods of destruction that defied all military logic. Phillips coordinated his attack with engineer Kate Morrison, who activated the hidden defense platforms throughout the outer planets. And these automated weapon systems used technology that the Zephyrians recognized, but had been modified in ways that no civilized species would have considered. The defense platforms created overlapping fields of destruction that forced the Zephyrian fleet into predictable movement patterns, and the humans exploited these restrictions by positioning their mobile forces to maximize damage while minimizing their own exposure to enemy fire. The most terrifying aspect of human strategy from the alien perspective was their complete willingness to accept casualties as long as they inflicted proportionally greater damage on their enemies, and Captain Steve Murphy embodied this philosophy when he led a suicidal charge against the Zephyrian flagship. Murphy's destroyer was destroyed in the attack, but not before it delivered a critical blow that disabled the alien command ship's main weapons array and disrupted their coordination systems and created an opportunity for other human forces to exploit the momentary confusion. Commander Vex Thule watched his tactical displays with growing horror as he realized that his empire had made a fundamental error in their assessment of human capabilities and that these supposedly primitive aliens were systematically dismantling his fleet, using methods that no Zephyrian strategist could have predicted. The humans were not fighting a desperate defensive action, but instead were treating the invasion as a learning experience that would prepare them for future conflicts with other galactic civilizations, and this realization filled the Zephyrian commander with a dread that he had never experienced in decades of conquest. Intercepted human communications revealed that their pilots and commanders were actually enjoying the challenge of fighting a technologically superior enemy and were competing with each other to develop the most effective methods of destroying Zephyrian ships. Pilot Amanda Foster demonstrated this attitude when she transmitted detailed instructions to her fellow humans, describing exactly how she planned to destroy the next wave of alien attackers, and her casual confidence in the face of overwhelming odds demoralized the Zephyrian forces more effectively than any weapon. Captain Danny Chen coordinated with civilian shipping crews to create a trap that used converted cargo containers as improvised mines, and when the Zephyrian fleet attempted to advance through what appeared to be empty space, they discovered too late that the humans had weaponized even their commercial infrastructure. The psychological impact on the alien forces became evident as their formation discipline began to break down under the stress of fighting an enemy that refused to follow any recognized patterns of behavior and seemed to find new ways to kill them with every passing hour. Dr. Marcus Webb's most devastating innovation was revealed when human ships began deploying quantum communication jammers that prevented the Zephyrian fleet from sending any information back to their empire and ensured that their civilization would receive no warning about humanity's true capabilities. Jammers created a communication blackout that isolated the invasion fleet from all outside support and meant that whatever happened in Earth's solar system would remain unknown to the rest of the Zephyrian Empire until it was too late for them to prepare adequate defenses. Engineer Jake Thompson coordinated the deployment of modified fusion charges that created cascading explosions throughout the enemy formation, and these weapons used the Zephyrians' own energy signatures against them by turning their advanced power systems into liability rather than an advantage. The alien fleet found itself trapped in a nightmare scenario where every technological advantage they possessed had been turned against them by an enemy that approached warfare with a flexibility and creativity that their rigid military doctrine could not. Counter-Captain Laura Adams commanded the fast attack craft that had been positioned in the outer system specifically to prevent any Zephyrian ship from escaping, and her forces demonstrated that the humans had anticipated every possible outcome of the battle, including the enemy's eventual attempt to retreat. The human strategy revealed its true scope as the battle progressed, because they were not simply defending their territory, but were instead conducting a systematic extermination of the Zephyrian invasion force that would serve as a warning to any other civilization that might consider threatening. Earth Commander Vex Thule realized, with growing despair, that his empire's arrogance had led them into a trap from which there would be no escape, and that the humans had used the Zephyrians' own confidence against them by allowing them to believe that victory would be easy and swift. As the tide of battle turned decisively against the aliens, it became clear that humanity had achieved something unprecedented in galactic history by transforming a defensive action into an offensive campaign that would eliminate an entire invasion fleet, while gaining valuable intelligence about alien technology and tactics. The surviving Zephyrian ships found themselves facing an impossible choice between certain destruction if they continued fighting and equally certain death if they attempted to flee, because the humans had prepared for every contingency and had no intention of allowing any alien vessel to escape their solar system. The final phase of the battle began when Commander Vex Thule made his last desperate attempt to salvage something from the disaster that his arrogance had created, and he ordered his remaining ships to target Earth's civilian populations in the hope that threatening innocent humans would force their military to negotiate a surrender. This decision proved to be the Zephyrian Empire's final and most catastrophic mistake, because the threat to human civilians triggered what military historians would later call the terror response, and every human ship in the solar system immediately abandoned all other objectives to hunt down the aliens who had dared to threaten their families. Captain Walter Green received the news that enemy forces were moving toward Earth, and his response demonstrated humanity's most terrifying characteristic, which was their absolute willingness to sacrifice everything to protect their own people, regardless of the cost in blood or resources. The human fleet converged on the remaining Zephyrian ships with a fury that defied all rational military calculations, and the aliens discovered that they had awakened something primal and unstoppable that would not rest until every threat to Earth had been eliminated. From the Galaxy pilot, Sandra Adams led her squadron in a coordinated attack that used their own ships as guided missiles, and her pilots followed her example by ramming their fighters into alien vessels in a display of sacrifice that broke the spirit of the remaining Zephyrian forces. The systematic destruction of the invasion fleet accelerated as human forces abandoned all concern for their own survival and focused entirely on ensuring that no alien ship would escape to threaten their civilization, and the space around Earth became a graveyard of Zephyrian ambitions. Engineer Kate Morrison activated the final defensive protocols from her hidden base on Europa, and her automated systems began deploying weapons that had been held in reserve for exactly this moment when human patience had been exhausted and their mercy had been forfeited. The last Zephyrian cruiser attempted to escape toward the outer system, but Captain Paul Carter intercepted it with his damaged destroyer, and when his weapons failed and his engines died, he made the decision that would become legend among human warriors for generations to come. Carter used his ship's entire nuclear reactor as an improvised bomb, and the explosion that followed not only destroyed the alien vessel, but created a beautiful nebula that would serve as a permanent memorial to human determination, and the price of threatening Earth Commander Vex Thule died aboard his flagship as human forces overwhelmed its defenses, and in his final moments he understood the magnitude of his empire's error. Because he had dismissed as primitives a species that possessed the most dangerous quality in the galaxy, which was the refusal to surrender. The destruction of the Eternal Dominion marked the end of the Zephyrian invasion and the beginning of a new era in galactic politics. Because humanity had demonstrated that technological superiority meant nothing when facing an enemy that would rather die than yield. General Patricia Kane stood in the command center of Luna Base and surveyed the tactical displays that showed the complete annihilation of the enemy fleet, and she knew that her species had crossed a threshold from which there could be no return, because they had proven themselves capable of total war. The aftermath of the battle revealed the true scope of human preparation and planning, because they had not only defeated the invasion, but had captured enough alien technology and intelligence to revolutionize their understanding of galactic civilization. Dr. Marcus Webb analyzed the captured Zephyrian communication equipment and used it to broadcast a message throughout the galaxy that would forever change humanity's relationship with other species and establish Earth as a power that could not be ignored or threatened. General Kane's message to the galactic community was simple and direct, and carried a weight that would resonate across civilizations for centuries, because she spoke not with the voice of primitives seeking acceptance, but with the authority of conquerors who had proven their strength. The human general informed the galaxy that the Zephyrian Empire had chosen to ignore warnings about humanity, and that their empire no longer existed, and she suggested that other civilizations learn from this example rather than repeat the same mistake. The silence that followed this broadcast spoke volumes about the impact of humanity's victory, because every major civilization in the galaxy suddenly realized that their assumptions about technological superiority and military dominance had been shattered by a species they had dismissed as irrelevant. Ambassador Kethra addressed a much-changed galactic council in the weeks that followed, and his words carried the weight of prophecy fulfilled, because he had warned them about the consequences of underestimating humanity. And now the entire galaxy was forced to confront those consequences. The Altarian ambassador spoke solemnly about the complete disappearance of the Zephyrian Empire and the emergence of humanity as a galactic power that possessed both the capability and the willingness to defend their interests against any threat regardless of its source or strength. The lesson was clear to every delegate in the council chambers that some species should never be underestimated, and that the galaxy had gained a new member whose approach to diplomacy was backed by a demonstrated capacity for total warfare. Human expansion began within months of the battle as colonies spread throughout the former Zephyrian territories, and Earth's growing fleet established bases that served as both trading posts and warnings to any civilization that might consider threatening human interests. The night sky above Earth became dotted with new stars that marked the lights of human settlements, spreading across the galaxy, and these beacons served as permanent reminders that humanity had earned their place among the stars through courage and sacrifice and determination. The final legacy of the Zephyrian invasion was not their conquest of human space, but rather humanity's conquest of their own limitations and their emergence as a species that would never again allow themselves to be dismissed or threatened by those who mistook their apparent chaos for weakness.